Chicago is like a war zone. Chicago is worse than some of the people that you report and some of the places that you report about every night.
So I will
in the Middle East.
President Trump speaking to ABC News, talking about some of the crime problems in Chicago, and there's a whole lot of denial going on in Chicago about what some of the problems are. Overnight, a 12-year-old girl was shot up there while attending a vigil for another shooting victim. Lots of problems. We're honored right now to welcome Milwaukee County Sheriff David Clarke, who is actually in St. Louis for an educational policy conference right now with the Constitutional Coalition. Sheriff Clarke, how are you, sir?
Fantastic, Mark. Thanks for having me on.
Hey, I'm thrilled we were able to track you down. I appreciate you giving us a few minutes of your time. When you hear the president describe the situation in Chicago, for example, like that, and say, hey, if you don't work this out, we're going to send the feds in, I'd like to get your thoughts on what the real problems are with the crime in Chicago.
Sure. And Chicago's just 80 miles from Milwaukee, so it's kind of right up the road. But what's going on, and you've seen a collapse of the social order in many neighborhoods in the city of Chicago, and actually if you just focused on four of them, on the west side, the north side, and one on the south side, or northwest side, I should say, you're going to find where most of this is occurring. These areas are run over by gangs. You have entrenched poverty. You have dysfunctional homes. You have questionable lifestyle choices, which I point out from time to time that nobody wants to talk about. They all dance around, but it's the cultural dysfunction of the black underclass that resorts to violence to settle disputes, to take property, so on and so forth. So Rahm Emanuel, the mayor, continues to just whistle past the graveyard as the bodies stack up. This is a crisis that's going on down there in these neighborhoods, and it's starting to spread as well into some areas that aren't used to this sort of thing. So, I was a little disappointed that Governor Rauner hasn't stepped in and done something. He doesn't seem to want to get too involved in it either. But President Trump is the only one. He put the spotlight on it during his campaign because what's going on with the death total and non-fatal shootings is a sin before God. And so I think that the federal government has an obligation in a situation like that. If nobody's going to do anything locally, I think they're obligated to come in with some resources and to try to improve the quality of life for Americans that live in Chicago. It'd be no different, Mark, as if, if a tornado ripped through or a hurricane or massive flooding in the spring like we see and the locals weren't able to handle it, the federal government steps in with their resources and tries to lend a hand. So Donald Trump has shown the courage because really, the previous president, President Obama, he ignored it as well. Nobody wants to touch this thing, but good people are dying. They're dying needlessly. And I thank Donald Trump for at least stepping up and having the courage to say, hey, look, you either take care of these Americans down there or we're going to come in there with our resources and we're going to help straighten it out.
Yeah, and I remember hearing you talk about this back during the election, but every time Donald Trump brought this up, every time he pointed to the crime in Chicago or trying to fix some of the problems in the inner cities, he was accused of having racist overtones. I seem to think that he really doesn't want to see people suffer, and he thinks there's a way to fix it.
That's exactly it. They did that as an intimidation tactic because it was going to have an impact potentially on the black turnout for Mrs. Bill Clinton, and in fact it did. All across the country, the black vote did not manifest itself for her like it did for Barack Obama, like it did for her husband Bill Clinton. And as a result, she was on the losing end. And I guess I got to thank God for that. But that tactic is used all the time. They even try to use it against me, the left, when I start talking about the crime, the violence, the poor quality of life. They say that I don't like black people. Use those sorts of inflammatory things in an attempt to silence you and go away. But look, Donald Trump is the president of the United States. It calls for leadership to be the president of the United States. Most of these are local issues, but again, when the local officials flat out refuse to do anything about it, I think the federal government has an obligation with their resources to come in and straighten this thing out.
Well, that's the truth. Speaking of the federal government coming in, I know you've got some people that are pretty far left up there in Milwaukee, but is Milwaukee, does it consider itself a sanctuary city?
They're trying to. As a matter of fact, the Milwaukee County tried to get a resolution put forth to declare Milwaukee County a sanctuary county. But as you know, maybe you don't know, but I'll let you know today. I have been and I will cooperate with immigration officials in enforcement of immigration as it relates to criminality. I don't have the authority to enforce immigration, but I work with ICE, the Immigration and Customs Enforcement. They come into our jail every day. They go through the bookings and find people that they want to do an additional investigation on. They make that decision, not me, but I open up my books to them. But the county tried to pass a resolution that would forbid immigration officials from entering the county courthouse and just some nonsense like that. But I made it clear. I put out a news release. I have been and I will continue to help the Trump administration and immigration officials as it relates to criminal, illegal aliens who are responsible for some heinous crimes that have occurred inside Milwaukee County. I have an obligation as well. It's a public safety issue. The president talked about it yesterday. He called illegal immigration a public safety issue because of the some of the crime that's committed by these individuals, and it's a catch and release policy that after they've served their time, and even if they're not charged, for instance, they're just let go back into the community to repeat that sort of behavior.
Right. And, you know, you've taken an oath, as have these other law enforcement and public officials across the country, but they seem to be willing to ignore that for politics.
Sure, and I think it's a shame, but you know, I'll be clear about this. You know, sheriffs have a lot of latitude within their county, and we're talking about when it comes to immigration enforcement, that is a federal issue. Sheriffs don't have the authority, but sheriffs have the opportunity to work with ICE agents, Immigration and Customs Enforcement agents, in terms of identifying criminal illegal aliens and detaining them so that the hearings can take place. See, what's happening now, Mark, is if you get an individual for a crime, so if you see he's under arrest, and let's say he makes bail, or let's say they release him pending further hearings or further investigation, ICE will come in and put a detainer on that individual and determine, you know, he's in the country illegally, and they'll say, is this a lawful process? They send over an actual detainer and say, hold this individual. Well, sheriffs don't have to honor that. Okay?
Right.
By law, they don't have to, but I do, because it's in the best interest of the people of Milwaukee County so that this guy doesn't get back out into the community. You know what happens most of the time is they disappear. They're in the wind now. Okay, they may have left your county, but they're in the wind. They'll go someplace else to set up shop and continue to engage in criminal behavior. So I think it's a disservice to the people of the county, but each individual sheriff has to make that determination.
That's true. We're talking to Sheriff David Clarke from Milwaukee County. He's in St. Louis. He's going to speak with the Constitutional Coalition conference that's going on here. You, I know, traveled to Trump Tower and met with the president-elect at the time. I was truly hoping we might see you in this Trump administration.
Well, let me say this. First of all, when I announced my support for Donald Trump, it came with no strings attached. He came to me, and I looked at it in terms of what was best for the country at the time, and it was him. But it was, like I said, no strings attached. I was invited to Trump Tower. I'm going to keep confidential anything that we said. I think that's the best thing you can do with the president is let him know that he has, you know, your confidentiality. But you know, we have had some discussions as to a role that I might play in his administration. Those discussions are ongoing. This will take a little time. They got a lot of decisions to make. There are like 656 presidential appointments in the administration, and so as you can see, they only got through the first layer of the cabinet. They got a long way to go, so I'll just be patient with it, but I am on their radar screen. Very
good. Well, sir, it's an honor to speak with you, and I appreciate you giving us a few minutes of your time, and we're glad to have you in St. Louis.
Thanks. It's a pleasure.
All right, Sheriff David Clarke, thank you for your time. Appreciate getting him on the air, and he's going to speak at that Constitutional Coalition convention that is going on, I guess, today through the 28th. And they're going to be over at the Frontenac Hilton.